You know, some of us, over the course of the last several years, have watched in our jurisdictions a real demographic change in our teaching force. And I guess, you know, and we've talked about this in the executive summary. I frankly don't even understand why we would even have to talk about this. Teacher diversity is a very important value. Yes, it's really, really important to minority students, but I would actually argue it is just as important to white students. We need to defy stereotypes. We need to debunk myths. And if you do not have, in 60 years after Brown v. Board of Education, a real intentional commitment to integration in your teaching force, then how are we going to have that kind of commitment in terms of our housing patterns, in terms of our schools? So it feels to me, just like you see in terms of the national data, that this is a really important value in terms of equality and opportunity. So that's why, you know, Leo and I both come from New York City. I was the head of the UFT for several years, about 12 years, 11, 12 years before I was the president of the AFT. And we would see in, you know, April, May, June, September, large groups of new teachers. And you'd see more and more white teachers. I'm looking at Leroy Barr. I think we had these conversations. We said, what is going on here? And you'd also see some of the very programs that were important in terms of career ladders, like paraprofessional career ladders, where you would have a really wonderful way of recruiting people from neighborhoods, particularly African American and Hispanic teachers coming into our teaching force. Those programs were being curbed or being criticized. And so I was really very pleased when Leo said he thought that the Shanker Institute could actually look at this both nationally as well as in different cities, particularly cities where we really needed to make sure we had a diverse teaching force. And so there's clearly ways of turning this tide, but first you have to understand it. And we did a lot of work, and the Shanker Institute did a lot of work, but this report is an indictment. And it clearly affirms a bunch of feelings that we've had. In New York, for example, what we saw was less recruitment and a maintenance of retention of teachers. But in so many of the other cities, we see a real decrease in the commitment to recruit teachers of color. And so there are clear steps to turn this tide. And that's, frankly, what I want to spend a couple more minutes talking about. But I do want to say one more thing, which is we made a real commitment to try to get this data. And we had some very challenging moments. Many state education departments and local districts tried to limit our access to this data. I'm very delighted that there were representatives of the Federal Department of Education. I'm really glad that people are here. But New York State Education Department, California State Department of Education, LA USD, and Louisiana all slow-walked the request for information. They charged exorbitant amounts, or they gave us faulty data, especially on charters. But the worst case, with all due respect, and some of it hit the newspapers this spring, was in Washington, D.C. After months of the administration telling us that the documents we requested didn't exist, we were finally provided with some documents, but formatted in a way that key pieces were edited out. And frankly, the only way we were able to get this data was because the city is also a state, and we're able to get this data because of that. So, number one, the data has to be more accessible and more transparent. We talk about data a lot when it comes to English and math test scores for individual children. But this data needs to be accessible and transparent as well, because we need to as Professor Ingersoll said, we need to really be thoughtful about how to use it. That's number one. Number two, we need to reverse this trend. And there are many things that we could recommend in terms of reversing this trend. This week, Congressional Black Caucus is meeting in town. We have some incredibly wonderful HBCUs. We need to invest in teacher training programs at HBCUs. Howard has been saying this for a long time. We've joined with Howard in lots of different ways. We need to invest. We need to invest in teacher training programs in tribal colleges. We need to invest in Hispanic service institutions. We need to invest in public colleges and universities. We have to incentivize the collaboration between colleges of education and district and charter networks. So we create not just a pipeline, but a mentoring program, an induction program, teacher residency programs, really having that kind of connection. And frankly, we need to resurrect something that Baltimore has done and we have done in New York City, which is programs such as paraprofessional career ladder programs, SVA career ladder programs, and other kinds of career ladder programs. And frankly, I would just end by saying, most importantly, we need to do what Professor Ingersoll was talking about. It's not simply making teaching attractive again. Yes, of course, teachers need higher pay. But what we're seeing is when you have better working conditions, when you have a supportive environment, when you have a collaborative environment, then teachers of all races, of all ethnicities, want to teach, want to become teachers, and want to stay as teachers. So this is important for kids, it's important for teachers. Students' learning conditions are teachers' teaching conditions. And to the extent that they are more and more attractive, we will create a virtuous circle and cycle of having more and more of a diverse teaching force, which is a very important value that we all should embrace. So, looking at this data, spent a lot of time trying to get it, but looking at this data, it seems to us at the Shanker Institute and the AFT that we've reached a crisis in urban education as it pertains to teacher diversity. And so rather than it just being a union calling out and saying, we need to do something about it, we have a very active and aggressive president who's using his last few months to do as much as he can do. And so I am calling on the President of the United States of America, holding a bunch of other national summits, hold a summit on teacher diversity. Let's get the best minds in the room. Let's get the president, vice president, others in the room, and let's see what we can do to create a comprehensive strategy for diversifying the teaching force. Thank you.